What's up, guys? We got Blake Lovell here from Southeastern 14. We're about a month and a half into the college basketball season. Couldn't think of anyone better to come on, chop it up just specifically the 23-24 basketball season so far. Blake, what's going on, brother?
Yeah, good to talk to you, Dave. It's been an interesting start to the season and conference play just around the corner in the SEC, so always an exciting time. So, yeah, it should be a fun conversation.
Obviously, we're about a month and a half mark in. We beat it our first 9 weeks if we were talking school-wise, and we'll get to some grades plus-minus system here in a bit. But what's some initial thoughts as we're about a month and a half into the season? Good, bad, and different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the SEC is always it's always interesting in non-conference play. I think this year was kind of an interesting start because you had some of those games early where you see teams lose games they shouldn't. You've still had some of those recently, whether it's a Mississippi State losing to Southern, Kentucky, UNC Wilmington. But I think back to of course, starts off with Vanderbilt losing to Presbyterian, Missouri loses to a Jackson State, and I just feel like that's kind of the transfer portal era now, where you just see teams that have added a lot of new pieces, and you add those games early that are just off, and you don't have everything just yet, the rotation wise that you're going to have come conference play and all that. So I think that's kind of just been a theme in the SEC over the past several years. But I think what you've also seen is you're starting to see now that some teams are getting their full roster back together, you're seeing the overall strength of the league. And by that, I mean Tolu Smith getting ready to return from Mississippi State. Think about the two-time transfer guys that could be, finally ready to play, whether it's a Brandon Murray at Ole Miss. I don't know. With injuries, Tyrese Radford, Bradshaw back in Kentucky, the biggest one. I think you're seeing that the SEC, the strength is on full display now. And I think that's why, there's a lot of positive momentum for the conference as we get ready for the start of conference play.
So sticking kind of with this topic, from a positive standpoint, from a biggest surprise, from a team standpoint, and from a position group, front court or back court, who's kind of caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's probably the easy choice for a lot of people, right? But I mean, I think just the combination of Ole Miss and South Carolina in terms of biggest surprises, and them being a combined 19-1 right now, I just don't think we ever would have projected that. I mean, I certainly willing to admit when I'm wrong. I was full on South Carolina as the number 14 team in the SEC, and I was not even debating that to start the season. That has not been the case. They haven't played as tough of non-conference schedules as a lot of other teams, but I think they're for real. They're one losses by 5 points at a really good Clemson team, and so you're not going to take anything away from them like that. So I think the guard play and just how well the offense has come along for South Carolina, that's easily been one of the biggest surprises. I think to me, of course, Ole Miss, you put them in that same category. They're 10-0. They've beaten everybody on their schedule. Hasn't always been pretty. I mean, I make the running joke that it does not matter if Ole Miss plays the worst team or the best team. It's going to be a 10-point game somewhere along, within 10 points, that game's going to be decided. That's just the way this team has played so far. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the combination of those two teams have easily been the biggest surprises, based on how they've played. Position wise, like I said, I think South Carolina getting some pretty good play just from that group of guards that they added to the mix. I think also you could look at this and probably feel like, hey, I mean, Mississippi State's 9-2. Even a Josh Hubbard, right? I mean, we did not know what to expect from Mississippi State, probably from the backcourt perspective. We knew in the front court, if Tolu Smith was in there, okay, that's a team that's going to be just fine. They'll have one of the best players in the SEC. But I think Josh Hubbard's emergence there in the backcourt has really helped kind of propel that Mississippi State guard group into a level to where, again, they're 9-2 right now. They had the head-scratching loss to Southern, but still, I think that's also been a big surprise in a positive way. Just for, I think, those teams in particular.
No, you're right about Mississippi State. You take away that one bad week from the Georgia, if I remember, the Georgia Tech and Southern week were all combined into one. You're right. The Georgia Tech game was still just a mystery to me. And still, I mean, granted, Georgia Tech went and beat Duke and Georgia put it on Georgia Tech. But you're right. Besides that 1 week, you're right. Mississippi State getting Tolu Smith back. You do feel a lot better about them. And I remember watching Ole Miss sitting there on my couch. It was, I think, the Tad Pad game when they went back. I think they played Sam Houston State. And you watch that game, the Detroit Mercy game, and you're like, man, they are just not. I mean, Detroit Mercy could have won that game if they don't miss a wide open layup. But they've gotten better every game. Like you go back, you watch. I'm excited to watch them play Troy tonight. You go back, it's impressive what Chris Beard's done. It's every game they've just improved. Matthew Morrell. But yeah, those are the two layups right there. I'd go with you, Ole Miss, South Carolina as well. Now, from the other end, opposite end of the spectrum, who, from a surprise standpoint, has been a disappointment from a team and a group standpoint?
Well, I mean, I'll get the obvious one out of the way first. I was on the lower end of Vanderbilt probably than a lot of people because my point was, look, there's no Liam Robbins, there's no Jordan Wright, two guys that were huge parts of that run they made towards the end of last season. But I did say, they could have one of the best guard groups out there in terms of the combination of Mannion and Lawrence. The problem is they've only had those two guys together for 2 or 3 games now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I did not think they would be maybe as good as some people thought they would be. And I'm not saying people thought they'd be a top 5 team in the league, but I saw some people say, all right, maybe they're top 7, 8. And I said, in the right circumstances, could they be a sleeper team? Sure. I didn't think they'd be this bad. And it's just not been good. I mean, they've lost their last 4 games by double digits to teams that, if you look at KenPom, all but one are outside the top 70. And they've lost by double digits to all those teams. And, look at their wins, right? They beat UNC Greensboro and a bunch of teams in the 300s. Like that's all they've done to this point. And again, the Presbyterian loss that we talked about earlier. So that's been really disappointing. I think the other probably duo of disappointing teams were the teams that we talked about the most last year. And that was Arkansas and Missouri. Missouri just kept saying every time I previewed Missouri going the season, I was like, my caveat to everything I say about Missouri is there's no Kobe Brown and there's no Des Moines Hodge. And the fact is there's not another player on the roster right now that can replace what those two guys did. Whether it's not just the scoring, the production, like it's just the intangibles, what those two guys brought to the table. I don't think there's anyone on the roster that can replace that. And I think we've seen that play out so far. They're still not a great defensive team. Offense has been hit or miss at times. And I keep describing it, they're not really elite in that 1 or 2 areas that are like defining the game right now. Whereas last year, it felt like they were so elite offensively. They were so good shooting the 3. They were so good at forcing turnovers. They're pretty good in some of those areas right now, but they're not that upper tier like they were last year. Maybe other than blocking shots and get some steals, which is nice, but it's still not helped their defense overall. So they've been a little disappointing out of the gate, I think. And I say that, right? It's if you take out the Jackson State loss, it doesn't look as bad for Missouri. But they're a work in progress. We'll see how they play against Illinois on Friday because that's a big game. And then Arkansas, Dave. I mean, it's I'm sure you listen to stuff, but I was all in on Arkansas to start the season. I just said, hey, this roster, the depth is there. These guys, they're 12 deep. Musk may play all 12, which he has at this point, but maybe that's not necessarily been a good thing because he's still trying to figure out the pieces that have to go together. And right now they're not going together probably the way he thought they would this early. And I always say I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because we've seen them do this, 3 years in a row. Mm-hmm. It's just usually not until you get closer to conference play. Although this year they started a little early where it feels like, they're losing some of these early. Can they really get it figured out? I tend to think with the talent that's there, they will. But you want to talk about like surprises, disappointments. If there's been a most disappointing position, it's Arkansas's guard play. Like it has just not been the consistent group that we thought it would be. And I don't like to knock individual players. These are college kids, but like Devo Davis has been one of the most important players for any team over the past couple of seasons, and especially with Arkansas's NCAA tournament run. But for whatever reason, like he's just not had the type of season yet that we thought he would have. And it's not just him though. Like it's other guys too that guard group has not come together. So I think the combination of just Arkansas as a team being 7-4, they've only got one good win. It was a nice win against Duke, as we know, but everything else, they've not had those standout games. They've had some disappointing performances elsewhere. And really just, I'm curious to see if they can fix these issues at the guard. They got options, but they just haven't figured it out yet.
No, I think you're right. Going back on Missouri real fast, I thought going into the season, you felt like their guys from the bench last year had to step up, like the Cammys, Noah Carters of the world. Wasn't a big fan of the Connor Vanover bringing. I think he's just kind of a guy, just a big body out there. You're right. They don't have like their dude, like a Kobe Brown or like you said, Des Moines Hodge coming in. And then from Arkansas, I mean, shoot, you watch the first couple of games. I think everybody's like, oh, they're an improved shooting team this year. Yeah. And it's like you said, you just still have not seen it. But we just touched on this team I'm about to bring up briefly from the biggest surprises, right? Like you said, the easiest layup, the Ole Miss Rebels, obviously sitting there at 10-0. What do you attribute that success too. Obviously, besides Chris Beard, but what do you see the on-court play from a standpoint of why the Rebs are undefeated, the only undefeated team in the league right now?
Yeah, it seems like you said, whether it's just the Chris Beard effect or what, but when you look at this team, I think what stands out is he's built a team that's pretty old in the right positions. And I think in particular, it's the three guys, right? And I think it's Morrell, Flanagan, and Brakefield. Now, obviously, Cisse comes back. He's an older guy. Sharp's an older guy. Talk about Brandon Murray. I think that addition is going to be huge for them. And even someone like Juju Murray, who's really developed into someone that I think, again, you talk about just kind of the way this roster was constructed going into the season. You were trying to figure out exactly what his role was going to be, but he was on that St. Peter's team, as we know, had a lot of success there, and now comes over and has really kind of stepped up in a pivotal role here. And I think what you're seeing is, again, they're older. They've got guys who have played a lot of minutes, and I think this is where the Alan Flanagan addition has been so important.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this, I mean, having watched Auburn, like the thing we kept saying about Alan Flanagan at Auburn was not that, sure, there were inconsistencies at times, but the fact is, like, that guy didn't feel like he was fully 100% for what, probably a season and a half almost, maybe 2 seasons. If you just think about, the injury a couple of years ago, even last year at times, you kept saying, all right, he's back, but is he all the way back just yet? But I think what you're seeing now is just the right blend. They're using him in the right way. And you've seen his consistency so far this season, scored 10 or more points in all but one game. And I think that's been just such a huge level. So really, I think if you tie it all together, Dave, it's like the combination of the guys they brought in, not everyone, but pretty much they're all playing the roles that we projected that if they're going to be a top tier team, which I always laugh, Max and I, people were giving us a lot of, what, back in the summer, because we said, hey, if all the pieces are there, we could put Ole Miss as high as number 3 in the SEC, just because if you looked at the roster, you saw 2 outstanding defense. You add a score, get the most out of Murray. Like we're going down the list here. You've got a 1 through 7 that can compete with anybody in the SEC, and I think just tying that all together, the confidence is there, and you know this too. When you get teams like this, whether they're only beating Detroit Mercy by 1, it doesn't matter, because here's the thing. They have built up this confidence now in all these close games where if they get in a close game with Tennessee on January 6th, they're going to feel really good about their chances, because it doesn't matter if they only beat Detroit Mercy by 1. They've beaten a lot of teams now in close games. They've made the winning plays against Memphis, UCF, all those games. And I think that does something for a team as you get closer to really the grind of your schedule. And they're way ahead of other teams in that category because they built up kind of that habit of just making winning plays in the final stretch of games.
Yeah, I think from a national perspective, I think you're right. People are going to really have their eyes on Ole Miss that first game in Thompson-Boling Arena, or they renamed it. I forget what they name it now in Knoxville. But I think that will be the first national test, because I think I saw Max mention it on one of y'all. Like, they haven't been in some national spot. Hell, they played Memphis today in the SEC championship game, or the championship game of the weekend in the middle of time. I think people saw that score, but no one watched. But transition to another team that I don't think is getting a lot of love, I guess is the word that comes to mind without overthinking it. And I think they're one of the more surprised teams, top 3 teams in the league, probably have the best front court in the SEC, or deepest front court in the SEC, is the Auburn Tigers. Like, what's your thoughts so far rolling through this team?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Auburn's getting enough love. I mean, we kind of say we're putting our power rankings out today, and we're just like, I don't know how anyone could not see Auburn as a consensus top 3 team in the SEC. Like, do I think they're Tennessee or Kentucky right now? Probably not. I mean, they'd probably be an underdog by, I don't know how many points, wouldn't be double digits, but it's like, I think Tennessee, Kentucky probably 1A, 1B in some order, but like Auburn to me is probably the 3rd best team in the league right now. And, I know they haven't played the schedule that an Alabama's played, or a Texas A&M's played, or teams like that, but I think it's the eye test, right? You watch this team play, and we laugh at this sometimes, but it's like, throughout the course of a 30-something game season, there's going to be a game where you don't play well. They didn't play well against Appalachian State, but I think that's the outlier, right? And I think that's a road game. I think that was more about App State than it was about Auburn. You can put a lot of SEC teams in that environment, given the stakes for App State hosting a game like that, and they lose. But everything else, they've dominated everyone except for Baylor. Like, they have dominated their opponents. And I always say, I think you can take something away from that. Talk about Ole Miss winning close games. That speaks to one side of the coin. On the other side, you can also say I love to see a team that can just go out and beat teams the way that it should beat teams. If you're going to be a great team, go out and beat USC the way that they beat USC. Go out and beat Notre Dame, right? Who's not,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a great team. Like, this is a team that is clearly in rebuilding mode. They went out and just took it to Notre Dame. Indiana, I mean, it's the same kind of situation to go out and beat Indiana.
And Blake, even that Indiana game looks decent now. Indiana should have beat Kansas the other day.
Right. Exactly. So it's like, I think you've got to start looking at Auburn and realize they've come a long way defensively. Think about where they were.
They're relentless,
first two
dude.
games.
What game was it last week? I was watching it. It was the game in Huntsville against Asheville.
Asheville, yeah.
They were just getting. I mean, Dylan Cardwell, obviously KD Johnson. They were just getting. I know Asheville's not great, but they were still just getting after them relentlessly.
Yeah, they fully bought in on defense now, and that was, I think, Bruce Pearl's biggest concern after a game or two was, I remember saying, second half defense, especially against Baylor, because that's a game they should have won, if not for their second half defense. And so even against Southeastern Louisiana, there were some things that left to be desired. But since then, they have turned it on, and that's been the difference. But it's also, look, I mean, we all, I think, Auburn fans, I think everyone got spoiled by the Final Four team and all that, and some of the better Bruce Pearl teams he's had at times has been ones that just go out and they can make threes from the logo, right? It's just guys just coming out and shooting threes. The teams the past couple of years have not done that. They've been poor shooting teams. This team's not an elite shooting team just yet, but the fact is, with Holloway, Denver Jones, guys like that, if they're stepping up making shots, just offers a different dynamic offensively. So I think it's all coming together for Auburn. They've gotten better defensively. The shooting has been improved. They don't have to make 14 threes a game like Alabama or anything. They just got to shoot a nice percentage like they did against USC. They went 8 of 21. Shot 38%. That's good enough. That's all they need. They don't need to take 43s a game. If they can do that, play within themselves, I would. I think they're going to wind up being a top 3 team in the SEC, not just right now, but probably by season's end. So,
but you tell me if I'm right. Auburn's ceiling is very high. Like what they do this year travels. Like I think you'd agree. They're going to lose games, except they're going to have some shooting nights, probably on the road somewhere where they don't shoot well and they lose, and people are on them. But what they do consistently travels where you're like, yeah, if I'm betting on a top 3 finish of teams, Auburn would probably be in there. Just got to kind of know what I'm going to get with them night in, night out. And I think their ceiling's even higher than even I anticipated heading into the season.
I agree. I mean, I think it's the case. And, I hate doing it. But, like, if you make the comparison between Auburn and Alabama right now, right, it's Auburn is a really good offensive team. They're a really good defensive team. They're not just one side or the other at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that combination has been the difference for them. And I do think that could be the combination, like you're saying, when they start to get. I mean, they start SEC play, tough week to start SEC play. They're at Arkansas, home against A&M. Those are 2 tough games. But I think the combination is what is going to kind of help them on nights where, like you said, they're going to have nights where they don't make a shot from outside. They're going to have some nights where they just struggle to do that. But if they're relentless on defense the way they have been recently, they're going to be just fine.
Sticking to that top 3 category of teams, just bluntly, do you think Kentucky is the best team in the conference right now?
I know it's funny because Max and I, again, we do our power rankings every week, and Max asked me on Saturday or Sunday, it may have been Sunday. He's like, "Who are you going to put at number 1 this week?" I said, "I'm putting Tennessee. What are you talking about?" I said, I'm still sold on Tennessee. I was like, I think, listen, I know they got 3 losses. They got 1 more than Kentucky, but they don't have the Wilmington game. Tennessee 3 losses were Purdue, Kansas, North Carolina. It's okay. Like I'll take Tennessee. And then by the time we recorded on Tuesday, I said, Max said, what did you wind up putting in your ranking? I said, I put Kentucky at 1. Because I don't know. I mean, again, like I said earlier, I think those 2 teams, you put them on a neutral court right now. One team's favored by maybe a basket at most. And upside, though, based on what we've seen so far, yes, maybe there is a point where I'm starting to look at Kentucky and say maybe I trust them a little more than I do Tennessee, which is, again, Kentucky, you talk about trust issues with a program. We know that for a longest time there, you didn't really have a lot of trust issues with Kentucky. But over the past several seasons, you started to rethink things a little bit in terms of, can they really do it? Can they really get back to where they used to be? I think they can with this team, because this team is just clicking offensively. They are clicking in terms of the chemistry. And that's the big thing, the chemistry. We talk about teams like Arkansas and all those. Everybody every year is bringing in new players, but you never know how that's going to turn out. And we've certainly seen that with some of Cal's teams in recent years. It just hadn't turned out well. But this team, it's clicking. The chemistry's there. You add Bradshaw back in the mix. It's been a flawless transition in terms of like the way you see him play against North Carolina. the balance that they have not just – it's not a team that just has a guy. It's a team that has all 5 guys on the floor you feel like are dangerous and at any time can beat you. And I think that's what we were used to seeing with Kentucky for the longest time, and he just kind of got away with that. Where it's you just got so much talent that you can just get by and be fine. But like this team isn't just talent; like they're buying into the little things. When you watch them play, they're on the floor, they're on loose balls, like they're just. And Max said it best. I give him credit. This is a fearless team. Like they don't back down from anybody or anything. And remember, we're not like previous Cal here in the past several years where he just got older. This is still a team that's playing a lot of freshmen. It's nice to have Reeves, nice to have Mitchell, but a lot of these guys are still young. Their first college basketball, and like they don't fear anything. And so, yes, as of right now, I would put Kentucky at 1. And I think the reason is just because you're seeing this team buy in to what Cal wants to do. And I'll say this, Dave, it's also on the other point of this, you're seeing Cal finally buy into the fact that you can't just play offense the way he used to play offense. Like he is finally letting his team play to its strengths, shoot threes, which for the longest time it felt like they were just 4 guys standing around, someone would dribble into the paint and good luck. It's not been the way. Like the offense has been so smooth to watch, and that was our biggest issue with Cal was he had to evolve offensively. He's let this team do that, and you're seeing the results.
Talking about a team, it can kind of be like Texas A&M last year, a team that kind of hadn't played their best, maybe not collected the wins that you expected maybe in non-conference play. Is there a team in your head that you could see kind of making that run A&M did last year once conference play starts?
If we don't pick the obvious in Arkansas, because I think they're just so much – they're better than 7-4, and I think like we mentioned all the reasons earlier why Arkansas could still get there. I think, and I say that they racked up the second most wins in the SEC, tied for the second most. I think Mississippi State is going to be a team that now that they're getting Toulouse Smith back, and they don't have an easy conference schedule. This is something I looked at earlier. You talk about starting to rank like conference schedules and such. Home against Tennessee, or excuse me, they start at South Carolina, which looks a lot tougher than it did going into the season.
Yeah.
Home against Tennessee, home against Alabama, at Kentucky. They got the Vanderbilt game sandwiched in there, which should be a win. But then you're at Florida, home against Auburn, at Ole Miss, at Alabama. That's the first half of your SEC schedule. Like that's pretty brutal. And so, but remember, this is also the same team that last year had a very brutal first half of the SEC schedule and started 1-7 and still made the NCAA tournament. Yeah. So I think, again, Hubbard's kind of emergence to be the player he's been, you know how this works. Like we've seen with Mississippi State. They're just a team you don't want to play. Like, I don't care who you are. It could be ugly one night, or they can come out and score 106 like they did against Tulane, which is just kind of the mind-blowing game to me for Mississippi State to score 106 without Toulouse Smith against a pretty decent team. Like Tulane's not they're not a bad team. So I think Mississippi State's the team that could be the A&M from last year. That just you get Smith back in the mix. They just are a grind to play against because they're going to defend. And the offense, I think, will open up even more having him on it because people have to respect him now if he's back on the floor. So I think Mississippi State's probably the team that has the best chance of being the A&M from last season.
When do you think we expect to see Ty? I saw he got cleared his X-ray, started practicing contact. Do you think we see him after head into week 2 of conference play, week 1?
My thinking on that was like, okay, he's cleared to play. If he's back in like full contact with practice, I would think if you're Chris Jans, you'd like to ease him in, but you probably also wouldn't want to just throw him in right away in terms of like, okay, your first game's at South Carolina. Maybe they get him a few minutes in that December 31st game against Bethune-Cookman, even if it's just like, hey, let's get out there and see how it goes. And then you've got a whole week off before you start SEC play. I wouldn't be stunned if maybe that's what they're thinking, or maybe it's like you said, we move a little bit closer to that original timeline, which is, maybe mid-January or something. But the fact that he's been clear to return to practice and such, I wouldn't be shocked if we see him sooner rather than later just to get him a few more minutes, get that kind of conditioning back a little bit before you do start that big stretch of games like we mentioned on January 6th.
All right, Blake, let's get to it, brother. We're going to go the grades in the first month and a half plus minus. And we're going to go letter plus minus system. We're going to go just in record of standings here. So I'm going to give record and then currently where they stand in KenPom. So we'll lead off. We've talked about them a couple of times here. Ole Miss coming in 10-0 right now, currently 90th in KenPom. What are we giving the Rebs?
I mean, you've got to give Ole Miss like an A, right? I mean, it's got to be. Like they're
Yeah.
10-0. They've won every game. I think you got to give them an A. Like it hadn't always been pretty, but they've won every game they played, and no other team in the SEC can say that. So
No, I mean, I think they're the easy right off the top layup A plus if you
yeah,
want to get plus minus system.
yeah.
South Carolina coming in 9-1, currently 69th in KenPom.
Listen, I may be a little too optimistic here, but I am going A plus on South Carolina. Like I mean, again, if you'd have told me they'd be 9-1 and looked as impressive as they looked at times. Now they've also had some games like Charleston Southern, right? They only won by 4. That's a bad team. They should have beaten them by more. But if you again are giving me that they're 9-1, their worst losses by 5 on the road against an elite Clemson team, it's got to be an A plus for South Carolina, who again most of us thought would be the worst team in the league going into the season.
Blake, in your opinion for South Carolina, what do you attribute the non-conference success? Is it the addition, obviously Michi Johnson, you got, is it the addition of like a guy like BJ Mack?
Yeah. I think it's the big 4. I keep calling them like that. This is the big 4 to me. It's Michi Johnson, BJ Mack, Miles Studi, Talon Cooper. Now, beyond that,
I think that's somebody people forget on South Carolina at times. You had watching the Studi coming over from Vandy.
Well, and I think that's been the difference because they've been able to make shots from outside. Like they've had 4 double-digit 3-point games this season. And had 9 against East Carolina on the road. So I think that's something where we talk about like again guard groups, like all those guys that can all do things on the perimeter. They can all just kind of impact the offensive. And remember, this team was they were atrocious in a lot of areas last year, but like offensively, they were just brutal to watch. Yeah. But I mean, they have just completely changed things. And I think it's just the experience of some of those guys too. Because again, think of the experience of a BJ Mack, Talon Cooper, and then you're adding Johnson and
basketball.
Yeah,
last
and
year,
Johnson and
your best player last year, what? Gigi Jackson, what?
Right,
16 or 17 years old at that point. He's your guy. You're trying to go get a bucket.
Yeah, so that's the difference to me, Dave. I think it's that group of 4 right there, guys who have played a lot of basketball. 2 guys in particular, Studi and Johnson, who played basketball in the SEC. And yeah, like they've all connected, and their chemistry has been fantastic when you watch those guys together.
Moving to our next team, we just talked about them. Mississippi State coming in 9-2, 31st in KenPom as we stand right now.
I mean, listen, without Toulouse Smith, like being 9-2 and having Josh Hubbard playing the way he's playing, I don't think you can be that down on Mississippi State, like I said. So I may, and I know it's like the Southern game. Can you really excuse that? But
just that
maybe
week.
I'll go B. I know B plus. If you just take that week out, like you would get a solid A, but I'll go B plus. But remember, they've done all this without Toulouse Smith. So
no, I agree. I'd go B plus too. I mean, so you said it's been a solid non-conference, especially when you factor in their best overall player has not even been with them, and they've looked impressive in other games as well.
Yeah.
Moving to the next team we got here. Let's load up my notes here. We got Auburn. We talked about them briefly just a moment ago. 8-2, rolling in at 8th in KenPom as we stand right now.
I am really high on this team. If you take out the App State loss, like I don't know how you could be upset with what Auburn's done. So I think they're an A, and if they beat App State, they'd be an A plus probably.
I agree. And like you said, they should have. What were they up 7 without 3 minutes left against Baylor in North Dakota or South Dakota? Moving on, Kentucky. We talked about 8-2, currently coming in 21st in KenPom.
I mean, I'll also go with the A with them because I'm like, again, if you just take the Wilmington out, there's another A plus we're handing out. But give me the A just because of the Wilmington game. So
Kansas was a game I thought they looked pretty good in, even though they lost. Yeah. Tennessee coming in 8-3, 7th in KenPom.
We could probably go B plus or A minus on Tennessee, I think, because and the reason I say that is if you actually look at it, it's like they've beaten Illinois and Wisconsin, which those 2 wins Wisconsin looks really good, even though they got blown out by Arizona.
It's on the road, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, they went and took care of business in that game. Illinois, I think it's a really good team. And so those are 2 solid wins. I think the only disappointment and why you would maybe knock it down A minus B plus would be you felt like you just should have played a lot better against North Carolina. That's just a terrible first half they had. They had opportunities against Purdue. They had opportunities against Kansas, just couldn't capitalize. So I think if you add another one, if you take one of those 3 games they lost and give them a win, solid A, but maybe knock them a little bit for not taking advantage of what felt like maybe the 3 biggest opportunities that they had. So
The Florida Gators, who I think have a big game tonight against Michigan, they roll in 7-3 and currently 38th in KenPom.
Florida is probably the biggest mystery to me of any team in the SEC. I could see their season going multiple ways here. I could see them finally kind of embracing just how talented they are and reeling off a lot of wins. I could also see them being maybe one of the more disappointing teams for the second straight season, which would not be ideal, I know, for Todd Golden. But, I mean, listen, we also have to factor in they were missing Han Logden. They were missing Pullen, in certain games. So maybe you certainly have to factor that. I think if they had Zion Pullen, they'd beat Virginia. But we could play the what-if game for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go C+ for Florida. I've been a little disappointed with them to this point, and they really don't have a lot to be excited about outside of a Pittsburgh win, right? So, I mean, I'll go C+, but I'm curious what we see from Florida the rest of the way. And big game tonight against Michigan. So
yeah, you're right. They're one of the more mysterious teams in the league. What do they roll, like a 10-man rotation? I feel like Golden and still trying. It's kind of like Mush trying to figure out their rotation right now. Moving on, Georgia coming in at 7-3, 86th in KenPom.
I mean, here's the thing, and we were debating this on our power rankings. I think we wound up putting Georgia 12. We're you know what? I mean, what do we have to knock Georgia about? I guess at this point, and it was they have 3 losses that are not bad. They beat Wake Forest. They had the miraculous comeback, I guess, against Florida State. Beat Georgia Tech, who we talked about, beat Duke and Mississippi State. But yet, it still feels like their ceiling is not as high. But if you just grade them on what they've done to this point, I'd probably give Georgia a solid B. They lost those 3 games, but they're not against terrible teams. And if you just put it in the context of where this program was 2 years ago, to get 16 wins last year was just incredible. And now to feel pretty good at 7-3, and honestly got a great chance to be 10-3, given their rest of their non-conference schedule going into that Missouri game. Yeah, I'd give them a solid B. I think they've been fine.
Yeah, you're right. It's not always pretty to watch. I mean, you open up. I remember the game that stuck with me is the Oregon game. They played out in Vegas to start off the season. It's not always pretty at times, but you're right. Yeah. I mean, Wake Forest beat Alabama. I mean, I know it's an exhibition. Yeah. But Wake Forest beat Alabama in an exhibition. I mean, Steve Forbes and them do a good job. Georgia Tech, like you said, had a few bucket wins between State and Duke. Like you said, Georgia's done some solid stuff. It's like you said, they're just not talked about much. But like you said, if Georgia's 10th or 12th in the SEC, kind of shows the depth of the league.
Yeah.
Yep. Spoke about them a little bit earlier too. Arkansas rolling in 7-4, 54th in KenPom.
Maybe I'm being too nice here, but I don't think we can just completely eliminate the Duke win. And I know the Lipscomb game was a struggle. Stanford, Old Dominion, all that. They won the games though. I mean, I know Arkansas fans are saying I'm being way too nice here, but I'll go C-, although I think there are Arkansas fans would keep them in the D or F range. I'll go C- just because, I don't think we can overlook that they did beat Duke and that this team has shown its potential. It's just been frustrating that they've not yet hit that point we thought they would, but we're only 11 games into the season. So I'm not too down on Arkansas just yet, but we'll go C-. They'll be on the lower end of the grades.
Blake, is it just me, or I feel like Arkansas, anybody puts out an SEC basketball power ranking or anything, they're the first to come discredit their own team. If you got them too high, I've had that happen.
I mean,
7, we should be at 10.
Yeah. I mean, again, Arkansas fans probably rooting for me to give them an F. I'm not quite there yet. And now the guard play, I would, probably give them maybe a D-, but overall, I still think, again, you can't take away the Duke win. And it's been frustrating, but they're still 7-4. So
here comes your Missouri Tigers coming in 7-4, 85th in KenPom as we stand right now.
Yeah, I'd probably give them the same. I'd go C-. Again, these are 2 teams that are certainly in that D range probably for a lot of people. But if I'm being nice and optimistic, I think it was just expectations. Maybe we should not have had as high of expectations. It's the Dennis Gates effect. Everybody laughs with me because, I had fun with the Dennis Gates hire and everything. And I kept saying, you guys are going to see, this guy can coach. And they had a great first season. But it's just a different roster. And I think if you set your expectations for this team to do what they did last year, you were going to be disappointed. But, once we started seeing them early, I'm like, yeah, this team's going to probably have its ups and downs. But C- because they, that Jackson State game sticks out like a sore thumb, I think.
We caught 2 interesting teams. The next 2, leading off with Texas A&M. They roll in 7-4, 22nd right now in KenPom. I'm interested to see your rankings of them, and then obviously our next team.
Can I give A&M an incomplete? Like, I feel like they're the incomplete team because it's like the Radford effect. I feel like is real because and I know it's been an issue. Buzz Williams talked about. Sorry, I got some landscaping. It sounds like going on outside here, but it's one of those things where I don't know that I can knock A&M for being 7-4, and all 4 of those losses are ones that you're not going to be upset about. Like, you're not going to be upset about any of them, except for maybe the Virginia game where you felt like you should have played better. But again, that's where if they had a Tyrese Radford, maybe it's a little bit different because they have an extra ball handler against the Virginia team that you know is going to defend you. So I'm not going to knock A&M. Probably, I think I would even keep them in the B range, maybe B minus, because remember they've been playing without their second best player in the biggest games, and they've lost those games, but they had their chances against Houston. Like Wade Taylor goes off against Memphis, frustrating. I know Virginia, Florida Atlantic, those are all good teams. So I'm not going to knock A&M for that. They've been kind of incomplete without Radford. Once they get him back and get in the stretch, I still think they're probably a top 5 team in the SEC. So B minus.
B minus for Buzz and the boys. Alabama is another team I'm interested to hear your grade. 6-4, still in the top 10 in KenPom, coming in at 9th. What's the letter grade through the first month and a half?
Can I give him a D and an O for defense and offense? Like, just, can I give a grade for each?
Night
like
and
defense, I don't know what you give the defensive grade. As low as maybe, no, not as low as you give it, but yeah. So maybe we have to meet in the middle on Alabama because it's like you would give the offense an A+, you'd give the defense maybe, most people give the defense an F probably. So maybe you meet in the middle and go nice C+ for Alabama. Because again, they're going to just outscore people some nights, but they're also going to be nights when they're not hitting shots and they're going to get, 90 put up on them. And we've seen that so many times now. So they are the extreme team. Like, it's just one extreme or the other with Alabama. Give me a C+ to keep them right in the middle there. So
yeah, Alabama reminds me a little bit, I feel like the team 2 years ago had a little bit of an effort issue. I don't see an effort issue with this team.
No, I don't
either.
This
is a team that could beat Auburn at home, or really anybody, especially at home in the league, but also go to what we just talked about, a team who I think is not getting a lot of love, but go to Georgia and not play well offensively that night and lose.
Yeah.
I mean, they did it 2 years ago and was Georgia's only conference win that year.
Yeah. So,
I mean, that's what you're dealing with Alabama. Is there any concern for you right now, before we move on, for Alabama about them missing the tournament at all? Just like let's just say they lose tomorrow to Arizona, and let's just say they go on. I think they got Eastern Kentucky and Liberty left. Let's say they just win those 2. Do you have any concern going into conference play about them being on the bubble? Or do you think just, hey, they played well in those games, they're just not finishing? If they finish, let's just say 10-8 in the SEC, they're in?
Here's what I think. I think Alabama is going to wind up running a decent number of SEC teams out of the gym, because I think there are SEC teams that are very average offensively. Not everybody, but the fact is, I think Alabama, we're going to see them separate themselves because they are so good on offense that there are going to be some teams offensively that aren't going to be able to take advantage of Alabama's defensive deficiencies. And I think there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to struggle to stop Alabama. So, I think they wind up being one of the better teams in the SEC. And even if they lose this Arizona game, like you said, they feel like their 5 biggest opportunities, you didn't get a win in any of them. They will beat enough teams to get to the NCAA tournament. I would be stunned if that doesn't happen. And again, that would mean the offense just completely falls off, because I don't know how much better they get defensively. I really don't. I don't know.
I'm with you. I think it is what it is. I don't think it's an effort thing. I mean, scheme wise, what else are you really going to do? I mean, because again, it's not like it's like, man, our guards can cover, but when they get down to the paint, man, we just don't have a rim protector. I mean, their guards are getting blown by. It is what it is. I think it is what I don't think you magically improve that in the next month. Yeah, that could improve, but I don't think it's going to be something where you're like, man, Alabama is a top 40 defensive efficiency team now. Look at them. I don't think it's going to be anything like that.
And I was just going to say, Dave, I think it's, you can look at the offensive numbers for some of these SEC teams right now. Some of that's deceiving. Like, every year we see this, where some of these SEC teams will go out and look great offensively against weaker opponents. But when you get them in the league against better defensive teams, and I know Alabama's not one of those right now, but just the physicality of the SEC and all that, you start to see teams, the 3-point shooting's not as good. The efficiency inside the paint's not as good. So, you could look at the numbers and say, oh, there's a lot of great SEC offensive teams in the SEC right now. On the surface, maybe. But,
those numbers come back to earth.
Yeah, there I think quite a few teams that are not going to wind up being elite offensive teams. And I don't know what that number is right now, but I think that's where Alabama will separate itself because it is right now head and shoulders above everybody else on the offensive side. So
2 more teams before we wrap it up, and one more question. So we got LSU rolling in 6-5, 107th in KenPom.
D-. I mean, that's probably being nice too. I mean, it's the only reason I don't give him an F probably is because Jalen Cook is, eligible to play as of right now, and I think he's going to make a difference. Like I think he will be the missing. I don't want to say the missing piece. I think got more than just one, but offensively, they're not going to turn the ball over as much. I think once they get Jalen Cook kind of into the mix, good offensive player, he'll help them out. We saw that pretty good second half against Texas. Not a great first half, but I still think LSU's a bottom 4 team, and it's a disappointing, follow up to what was just a bad year last season for Matt McMahon in terms of the production they had. But I feel like Cook's going to help them a little bit. So I won't go all the way F just yet. But, yeah, it's not been pretty at times for LSU.
And then finally, Vanderbilt checking in at 4-6 and 229 right now in KenPom.
I mean, I think we all know what grade here, and I hate to do that because it's just like you felt like the momentum was there towards the end of last season. But like I told you earlier, I mean, it's fair not to expect this. Like you could go into the season and feel like, okay, this shouldn't happen because it shouldn't. Like they should not be in the situation they're in right now, even though they haven't had everybody on the floor together at the same time. But it's not there right now. Like we said earlier, and I just think it's they're the team at the bottom of the SEC for a reason. And I just don't know roster wise if they're going to be able to fix that this season, even with the 2 guys that are all SEC type players. And Colin Smith just got ruled out for the season with an injury. That didn't help. He was kind of their breakout guy, I thought, this year. So yeah, again, there's a reason Vanderbilt's at the bottom and probably going to get the worst grade of the group. So.
All right, Blake, last question before we get you out of here. Again, appreciate your time. Blake Lovell from Southeastern 14. Give me your top 4 right now. How you think we're going to finish in the SEC, your top 4 teams in the league as today of December 19th.
Oh, all right. Well, since I picked Kentucky 1 earlier, I guess I have to kind of keep them there, even though I was the one that, was the waving the because without knowing Radford, it's hard for probably me to put A&M in there. So I think it's probably a combination of Alabama and Auburn in some order. Like I said earlier, I'm not that concerned about Alabama, so I may wind up putting Alabama at 3 and Auburn at 4, just because I know it sounds silly, but. Who cares if you give up 90 if you score 91? I think Alabama's going to do that a lot probably in SEC play. Like they're just going to outscore teams. And again, I don't think we should let this 3-game stretch, which you and I are recording this on Tuesday. Who knows? Maybe they go out and beat Arizona on Wednesday. Of course, it's an angry, pissed off Arizona team, which they probably don't.
I feel like Alabama's got everybody off losses too. You had Northwestern with Purdue, then you had UNLV with Creighton, and now you got Purdue beating Arizona before Alabama plays Arizona.
Listen, let's say Alabama loses by single digits. I am not going to be upset at a team for losing 3 straight single-digit games to Purdue, Creighton, and Arizona. So I don't think we should overreact to that. There is reason to overreact to the defense, but I wind up putting Alabama 3rd just because I think, again, they're going to outscore some teams. They'll be very entertaining games. There's going to be a lot of frustrating times for Nate Oates probably looking at his team defensively and saying, what do we do to get you guys to make a stop and not foul? Yeah. But I just think they're so good offensively that they'll still win games, even if those are issues. So, yeah, I'll go Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, top 4.
Yeah, I'm not really concerned about Alabama overall. You're right. The SEC isn't an overall great shooting conference, so inevitably it's gonna the defense isn't gonna face
what Missouri did last year, right? I mean, I'm not saying Alabama's Missouri, but if you look at it last year, Missouri was good for one reason. They were not because they were good defensively. They could force turnovers, and that was about the best they could do. But they were so good offensively that it helped them win SEC games against teams that were kind of middle of the pack. And they just managed to go out and outshoot teams sometimes. And I'm not saying they're the same teams, but I think Alabama could do the same this year and be just fine in the SEC.
Yeah, you're right, because Missouri wasn't a great defensive or rebounding team last year.
No.
Nope, you're right. No. Well, Blake, I appreciate you joining us, man. We're only a month and a half in. We had a long time. We had a lot more fun to follow this SEC basketball season. Blake, I appreciate you. I know you're a busy guy. Y'all do great content at Southeastern 14. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come join us to talk a little SEC hoops.
No, I always enjoy it, Dave. Again, appreciate what you do too. It's always fun having more people, talk about SEC basketball. We're a small group, but we all enjoy talking to each other, and yeah, it's just fun. So I always appreciate the conversation.
All right, brother. Appreciate you. Have a good one.
Thanks, Dave.